Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 18. and The text for today says, "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, 'If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way now that you have come to your servant.' 'Very well,' they answered, 'do as you say.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. 'Quick,' he said, 'get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread.' Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set them before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. 'Where is your wife Sarah?' they asked him. 'There in the tent,' he said. Then one of them said, 'I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son.' Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, 'After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?' Then the Lord said to him, 'Why did Sarah laugh and say, "Will I really have a child now that I'm old?" Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son.' Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, 'I did not laugh.' But he said, 'Yes, you did laugh.' When the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, 'Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him.' Then the Lord said, 'The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down to see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know.' The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, 'Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right?' The Lord said, 'If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake.' Then Abraham spoke up again. 'Now that I have been so bold to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there,' he said, 'I will not destroy it.' Once again he spoke to him. 'What if only 40 are found there?' He said, 'For the sake of 40, I will not do it.' Then he said, 'May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there?' He said, 'I will not do it if I find 30 there.' Abraham said, 'Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there?' He said, 'For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it.' Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry. Let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. All right. So originally I was hoping to get Genesis 18 and a good portion of 19 into this with sort of the resolution of the story. It's just too much. Just already this feels like quite a lot. So we're going to split this story into a couple pieces, but we're going to start here. Remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And let's go ahead and pray before we start actually answering the questions. Dear God, we're so grateful for this day. And we know that you are here speaking to us wherever we are and whenever we are, that you have a plan for this time that we have together. And we ask that you be glorified as you change us, transform us by your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Number one says, what happened in last week's Bible study? A, God invited Abram into covenant relationship with him. That's true. B, God renamed Abram and Sarai. That's true. C, God promised that Sarah would bear a son within a year, and they were to name him Isaac. And that's true. And we have that sort of reinforced now in this text. D, Abraham circumcised his whole family in accordance with the covenant, and that is also true. So that kind of brings us up to where we're at. God has been sort of almost, it seems like, re-speaking the same promise to Abraham in multiple texts as we go along, perhaps because they needed a little convincing, because their response was not always immediately um, as if they really believed that's what was going to happen. So God keeps speaking it again and again, this promise that He's made to them. Number two, what happened in 18:1 through 15? A, the Lord appeared to Abraham at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Yes, that happened. B, Abraham saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he bowed down. That's true. So there's this sort of simultaneous appearance of the Lord and these three men. And I'll just be honest, as we read through this text, sort of the back and forth, it is not a coincidence, and that's clear. It is not a mistake. God is present when these three men are present, and um, we could talk about them being angels. We could talk about the symbolism of them being three of them, and maybe them representing perhaps the Trinity or something like that. I don't think that's a strong emphasis in the text or the commentaries about this, but certainly it seems like sort of the presence of God appears simultaneous with the presence of these three people, and when these three people go, God hangs around with Abraham a little longer, it does seem, but it just really seems like God is with these three men, and he appears to Abraham at the coming of these three men, and so there is something very sort of connected between the appearance of these three men and the presence of God being present with Abraham. See, Abraham wanted to feed them and give them water to wash their feet. That's true. D, one of the men told Abraham that he would return in a year and Sarah would have a son, which is where sort of the people talking gets really confusing, because there's what the man says and there's what God says, and the man says what God says, and the man says what God has already said, and then God continues the conversation that the man begins. And so it's really, for me, hard to delineate and distinguish between the three men and God. almost as if they are sort of one and the same in their coming, and in the conversation that is being had. Sarah laughed, and God asked why. Then Sarah lied about laughing, which is not that's not a great look. There's that. Number three, what does God do about Sarah's laugh? So that's the interesting thing to me. So right here in this text, even though she laughs, God, asks her why she laughs. But that's pretty much all. He doesn't strike her down or change the plan or anything like that we would probably expect him to do. The second part says, "What does God do about Sarah's lie?" So he really just responds, "Yes, you did laugh." Don't why are you really trying to lie to God, honestly? Because God knows, you can't convince God that you did something other than what he saw you do. So that's just sort of foolishness. But have we tried that? Have we tried to sort of argue with God? No, 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 I didn't lie. Um, but God does it. He corrects her. He says, "No, I know what you did. I know you laughed. I know you're lying." But he again doesn't strike her down, which is, I don't know. Sometimes I think we would want that to be the answer, or what happens. We would want to see some definite penalties and immediate penalties for this sin. What is a lack of faith that is then covered up by a lie. So this last part says, "Is there no justice or punishment for sin and doubt or faithlessness?" I would just say that there ultimately is definitely punishment and justice for sin, for faithlessness. But it's also true that God's first attempt, and God works hard to turn us from our faithlessness, to turn us from our sin, before he produces these long term or eternal consequences. Um, so I think um, there's a tendency for us to either assume there's no consequence for sin. So if there's no consequence for sin, we can just go ahead and do it. We can go on doing it. Or that the consequence is so immediate and final that God seems unjust or unfair, and is presented as something other than the loving God we know him to be. So I would just say that God is a God who, although there is justice and there is punishment for sin, and eternal consequences for that, that his first attempt will be to turn us from our sin. And so that means that sometimes there is not the immediate consequences that we expect because God is working on transforming us first. And we should actually be grateful for that because that's what he has been to us and what he continues to be to us. And so he hasn't struck you dead immediately, though you have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But he is working to turn you back to himself, if you haven't yet turned. Number four, what happened in 18:16 through 21? The men got up to leave, and God asked if he should hide from Abraham what he is about to do. So this is such an interesting thing. So the men are leaving, and God is conversing with himself, apparently, or conversing with these men, or we don't really, he just says, "Should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" And it's so interesting that God would sort of think out loud, or discuss with these three men if that's what he was doing, but God would sort of consider what he should do. And it makes me wonder, did he already plan to share with Abraham Um, you know, Jesus tells us in the New Testament that we are no longer servants, but we should be called friends, or we're adopted as sons. Because the son knows the father's business, the servants don't necessarily know the father's business. And so the relationship that God has with us is one that when we are sort of co-workers with Him in covenant, co relationship with Him, that He talks to us about His plans, and we become a part of His plan. And we all know that occasionally it feels like we're a part of God's plan, and we don't really know what God's plan is fully. And certainly that can be the case, and we can unknowingly be a part of God's plan. But I do think that God's intent and His desire is to reveal to His co-workers His plan for us and for the world. So B, God apparently decides that Abraham is a partner in his work because of his covenant with him, and he chooses to share what he's going to do. And this is a hard thing that he is going to do because he is going to bring punishment for sin to Sodom, likely. So, see, the Lord tells Abraham that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, we know that these are connected, although specifically he's talking about Sodom in this text, has been so grievous that he is going to go down and check it out. The implication being that if it is as bad as the outcry, he would destroy them. So we know what comes next, sort of that is the outcome, destruction. And he says, I'm going to go see if the outcry is. So people are crying out at the injustice, and God hears the cries of his people. So apparently somebody is saying, this is horrible what's going on here. God, don't you know about this? Don't you care about this? And so God is going to go down in the form of man, apparently in the form of these three men, and check it out. And if it is as bad as the outcry is, then there has to be consequences. Um, so number 5, what was Abraham's response to God in verses 18:22 through 25? He asked the question that we all ask when we read a text about the destruction of a city or a nation. It's something that we've discussed as a church when we talk about even the taking of the promised land and the destruction of the Canaanites. Is will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? So this nation has done wrong, but aren't there godly people in there somewhere? And will you actually destroy godly people because of the sin of the generality, the most people? Um, so then he says, won't you spare the city if there are 50 righteous people? And God says, actually, I will. If there are 50 righteous people, will you? I will spare the city. See, surely you wouldn't. Far be it from you to do such a thing. You'll do the right thing, won't you? This is sort of how Abraham talks to God. Um, is I know enough about you. Now, certainly, Abraham does not have the extent of the knowledge of God that we have with the scriptures and the history that we have, because he was interacting with God before all of that existed. But we have all these stories of God's interaction with his people, and we have a sense that we know a God who wouldn't destroy 50 righteous people because of all these unrighteous people around them. And so Abraham sort of talks to God. You wouldn't do that, would you? And God says, no, I would spare the city for 50. And he says, well, what about for 45? I mean, that's only 5 different. Are you going to not spare it for 5 because of 5? You're short 5 people. Like, sort of all of a sudden we're moving from this sort of transactional or fact-based legalistic thinking to what if you fall short? What if it's 49? Are you still going to destroy it? Or what if it's 45? What if it's 40? And he actually works his way all the way down to 10 till Abraham is apparently satisfied that if there's 10 people, God will not destroy the city. And surely there's 10 righteous people. I mean, he doesn't argue it down to 5 or to 1. He says, surely there's 10. Surely that was enough arguing it down that God doesn't destroy a city when there's righteous people. He destroys a city when they're all unrighteous. And in the time of Noah, which we've passed that study, but it says that the intent of people, of humanity, was only evil, and that all the time. And basically he saved the only righteous people. And there's some question based on how they reacted or acted after he saved them, about whether they were even really righteous people continuously. But apparently must have been better than the people that were destroyed. Um, and so whenever this sort of destruction is happening, there's this question, um, is God destroying the righteous with the wicked? And the question is answered sort of here is no, that he would spare for the sake of the righteous. But are there even really 10 people in this whole city of Sodom that are righteous? Um, and we start to see the dilemma that God is dealing with, I think, in a way that we assumed that there was surely 50 righteous or 40. Um, but no, the challenge is that there's not even that when God is punishing for sin, it is so rampant that it's hard to find even one righteous person. Um, Number 6 says, how does God respond in 8:26? Is he says, nope, I'll spare the whole place for the sake of 50, and then does it in there according to 18:27 through 33, and we've already been talking about that. No, he talks them clear down to 10. So then number 7 is kind of where we're going to stop for this text, and that is, do we question God's graciousness or his righteousness in this type of situation? And I would say that I can just tell you from the questions that we have during Bible study and the questions in the open session afterwards, that we seem to constantly question God's graciousness, question God's righteousness, despite the graciousness that he just showed to Abraham and Sarah. We question God's graciousness, and we think, man, he's going to destroy the whole city, and all the righteous people that are there are going to be destroyed with them. And we don't realize that, no, here's the deal, is there aren't any righteous people. And everybody is apparently just following the crowd and doing the same thing the people around. Like, wouldn't it be great if we were the 10 righteous people that God saved a whole city for? But what is our tendency? How do we usually respond? We're like, oh, well, everybody else is doing it, it must be okay, and we go along with the crowd, and we become the unrighteous instead of being like the only ones. Let us be the only ones, if that's what it takes. That a whole city could be saved because we are the only ones. Let us be the examples that hopefully others can be saved because of our commitment to being those righteous people. And instead of being ones that sort of end up following the crowd and justifying our sin because everybody's doing it. And we're going to go a little deeper into this as we go along in the story, so we're not finished there. But let's think about our role and who we are. Let's be the ones that are in right standing with God, um, when God is looking for even one.